don't wish to go into the history of the 2012 decision, except to say that at the time that this decision was made in 2012, it was never executed, even though the lease was presented. And thereafter, an offer was made potentially to purchase the property in 2013. That was not acted on the basis of a valuation which was done. The valuation presented a value for the property in the amount at the time, Mr. President, of $26 million. That was in 2014, January 23rd. But the offer being made by the company at the time, American Rural Clinics, was not in tandem with that, and they offered what could at best be described a fractional value for that property. On that basis, Mr. President, the 2012 lease for the St. Joseph Hospital was never executed, and the government now in 2022, after an extended period of time with the facility being left in abeyance, is now seeking to create a special purpose vehicle, and with that special purpose vehicle to vest it in the University of the West Indies for the purpose of a new project. Now, in the special purpose vehicle, it will be classified by two shareholders. The government of Barbados will hold 25% of the shares, and the University of the West Indies will function as the principal over the property with 75% of the shares. Now, those are the basic facts surrounding agenda items on the order paper 3 and 4. The rescission in the first instance and the vesting in the second instance, Mr. President. What I do want to talk about today, Mr. President, in my submission on this particular bill will be best captured in 5 main points. 5 main points. And they're anchored around the relationship of a people of the Caribbean region, the government of Barbados, and the University of the West Indies. We have, Mr. President, a tertiary level institution that is rated #1 in the Caribbean and in the top 1% in the entire Americas region and in the top 5% globally. I say that, Mr. President, as my opening commentary on the nature of this relationship between the University of the West Indies and Barbados and the region to be able to introduce 5 points. The first of those points, Mr. President, is a government and a people that historically has understood the nature of the relationship between education and the underdevelopment of a people. Now, Mr. President, it is important to contextualize the vesting of the St. Joseph Hospital, a medical facility historically, in a university that began with a medical campus in 1968. A medical campus, incidentally, Mr. President, that here in Barbados in particular, was based just down the road at the Bridgetown Port, which I also now have responsibility for as a different institution. And how here we are now in 2022, Mr. President, in a different environment, entirely different incarnation, vesting a historical medical facility in the University of the West Indies. We started, Mr. President, also in the University of the West Indies campus at Mona, my own campus for undergraduate study. And at that campus, Mr. President, that campus also started with a medical faculty to begin with. Why did that begin, Mr. President? And if you understand the history of the University of the West Indies and its connection to underdevelopment and subsequently development, you will understand why the university, as at 1968, evolved from an institution with 1 campus to now having 5 campuses all across the Caribbean, Cave Hill here in Barbados, Mona campus as a home campus, the St. Augustine campus in Trinidad and Tobago, the open campus in 14 jurisdictions across the region, and the most recent landed campus in Antigua called the Five Islands campus that focuses predominantly on teaching, tertiary level education for technical, vocational, and educational training, as well as some other limited areas that will then allow for those persons to matriculate onto the other campuses into faculties. When, Mr. President, we came to the last 10 years prior to this administration coming into power, you had a scenario where the University of the West Indies from 1968 till now, till then, I would call it 2018, was functioning in almost in decline. The University of the West Indies was taking students from all across the region, but let's start here with Barbados. And the University of the West Indies was taking Barbadian students, many of them from single-family homes, many of them from single-parent homes, many of them from underprivileged circumstances, and giving them an opportunity to dream, to aspire, to be inspired by the access to tertiary level education. And that is the very first pillar of the tertiary level institution that is the University of the West Indies. Why would a government want to vest assets of the state in an institution called the University of the West Indies? Because of that very thing, access. Access for families to always be able to improve their standard of living and their income brackets by education, to be able to aspire to be more than those who went before. That is the institution that the government of Barbados is vesting 75% of the shares of this SPV in. The University of the West Indies has had an extensive conversation over the last few years about its financial situation. And in the last strategic plan for the University of the West Indies, Mr. President, we talked about three: the AAA strategy, access, alignment, and agility. Now, in 2021, we have a new model, and it's called the Financial Revolution. And the Financial Revolution builds on all that has been done before. This is why we are going in the direction of ensuring, Mr. President, that the University of the West Indies contributes to the development of a people by ensuring access, by ensuring alignment with the policies of a government and of a people and of a region. And why do I say a region as well, Mr. President? Because what we're doing here in Barbados with the vesting of the St. Joseph Hospital in a special purpose vehicle is part of that financial revolution. It is part of what is already underway across the entire Caribbean with the University of the West Indies. So the St. Augustine campus, Mr. President, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has vested, we call it, and I say this and I say we because I'm still mentally a part of the university fraternity and in my heart emotionally a part of the university community, where I was a member of the executive management team for the university for the last 4 years before joining government service. Mr. President, the government of Trinidad and Tobago gifted the University of the West Indies a medical corridor. A corridor that stretches from Mount Hope in Trinidad and Tobago, where we all know it for those persons who would have attended law school in particular, all the way down to Couva. And that is meant to be a medical corridor where people can invest in and benefit from a commercial space anchored by the University of the West Indies, supported by the government of Trinidad and Tobago in order to make access available to citizens, in order to ensure alignment with the direction of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. In Grenada, Mr. President, 25 acres of land have just been gifted by the government of Grenada to the University of the West Indies. It is meant that there is meant to be an expansion of the facility to support the OECS. In Antigua and Barbuda, we now have expansion of the campus at Five Islands, Mr. President, in support with the government of Antigua and Barbuda. And in Jamaica, the home campus of the University of the West Indies, where the headquarters of the University of the West Indies is vested, we now have an expansion taking place in Jamaica, not just at the Mona campus in Kingston, but in the Western campus in Montego Bay, specific to the tourism and hospitality expansion work of the University of the West Indies. What Barbados is doing, Mr. President, is empowering this institution to deliver access and alignment to its citizens and to Caribbean people as part of the development of Caribbean civilization. What the government of Barbados, Mr. President, is doing is ensuring that the University of the West Indies is able to contribute to the future economy and the future development of our country. And what do I mean when I say that, Mr. President? What would you say if I said to you that the University of the West Indies has a commercialization policy? The University of the West Indies has a commercialization policy where research and innovation is encouraged by tertiary level students pursuing either master's degrees or PhD degrees. They are encouraged to look for new innovations and new ideas. Some of the most amazing ideas and research come out of the University of the West Indies tertiary, the final year, the postgraduate programs. The Mona campus owns a number of patents already, and they are being held and paid for by the University of the West Indies. The policy is that they're held for a period of 10 years, during which we are meant to move to commercialization. if they're not commercialized within a 10-year period, then a decision has to be made on what happens then. Here we are now, Mr. President, in a space and in a time where innovation is to be encouraged, where entrepreneurship is to be encouraged, where the University of the West Indies, our flagship tertiary level institution, is meant to work hand in hand in alignment with the governments and people of the region to be able to deliver on a new economy, the future economy, to be able to ensure that people have access and are included and have opportunity for new ways of doing business. And in the area of medical sciences, this is an area which the university, I have already outlined, has a long history with. And it is only fitting, Mr. President, that the University of the West Indies, in partnership with the government of Barbados, would now be the anchor for the St. Joseph Hospital to be able to invest in commercialization, in entrepreneurial development, in entrepreneurship, and also to ensure that the outputs of commercialization, the outputs of research, in particular policy-driven research, that are in alignment with the government and people of the country, then have the opportunity to generate intellectual property ownership for our people that then positions our region in a state of leadership, in particular in the areas that are of critical importance to us. Now, this is also important because the University of the West Indies, I just outlined where the UWI is already anchored here in the region. I outlined our online campuses, but I also should point out that the University of the West Indies has online centers and overseas partnerships with entities in different parts of the world, in South Africa, in Ghana, in Nigeria, in Latin American region. The University of the West Indies has an aggressive internationalization structure that then allows the university to benefit from partnerships with the government. So, Mr. President, what is being proposed in the context of all I have just described for the St. Joseph Hospital by the University of the West Indies? By this University of the West Indies that you have just heard me talk about, that is critical to access for our people, that is going to help to create the pathway for a revitalization of Caribbean civilization, that is critical to the conversation across our region on commercialization, that is anchoring our Caribbean development processes on entrepreneurship and our research, and also is meant to be a part of that future economy. What are their plans for the St. Joseph Hospital, Mr. President? It is my understanding from the University of the West Indies that they intend to ensure that the St. Joseph Hospital is used for a range of purposes. One of those, and principal among those, is research and partnership, in particular in an area that is of particular interest to Barbados. That is the area of diabetes control and management, but in particular, diabetes reversal. Now, we have heard our Prime Minister and we've heard our medical health officials speaking at great length about non-communicable diseases in the country. We have heard, not with any pride, that Barbados is the diabetes capital of the world. We have heard, not with any pride, that Barbados is the amputation capital of the world. And so why would the University of the West Indies, the institution that you have heard me describe, not be that flagship institution in the forefront of leading not just Barbados, but our region in treating to an issue that is affecting our people? Why would the University of the West Indies not be that entity that is taking lead responsibility in partnership with another international partner to be able to establish a dedicated focus for diabetes reversal here in Barbados? And I want to take a moment to commend the leadership of the University of the West Indies, starting from Vice Chancellor Sir Hilary Beckles to the University of the West Indies at Cave Hill Principal, Professor Clive Landis, for their leadership in anchoring this process going forward. In addition to that, Mr. President, it is my understanding from the University of the West Indies, and speaking with them as recently as yesterday, that they too, as part of that internationalization agenda that I have just spoken with you about, have been partnering with international schools. And if you were to see, it was an interesting scenario, Mr. President, during the period before 2018 and after 2008. where the University of the West Indies was seen through a cost accounting mechanism as a drain on government resources as opposed to an investment in our people and ensuring access for our people. The University of the West Indies, Mr. President, was seen in a study that was done by the Deputy Principal of the University of the West Indies, Professor Winston Moore, to be the second largest foreign exchange earner for Barbados' economy besides the tourism sector. The only sector that generated foreign exchange in that 2012 study that was in excess of what the University of the West Indies generated was the tourism sector. And that was driven, Mr. President, by international students who become students, visitors, and tourists for a year. And so it is contemplated, Mr. President, that now in partnership with Ghana, the University of the West Indies will also be offering expanded provision of medical service and medical studies, MBBS studies, here in Barbados for students to complete their first part of their degree here in Barbados and then return to Ghana for their clinical training. Mr. President, the University of the West Indies has demonstrated to us and to the people of this region that they are committed to access, alignment, and to ensuring that there is agility. Now, Mr. President, I want to take a moment to make the following points. As we listen to conversations that evolve around us, there's always a danger of singularity. And this is what I mean by the danger of singularity. We think that what we see before us is what is, and there is nothing else but that which is before us, Mr. President. Mr. President, when the University of the West Indies is finding itself in the press because people are of the view that it is being poorly managed or that there are challenges with how its finances are being managed, I want to make you think about a couple of things. The University of the West Indies, for example, has had a model where governments pay a percentage of tuition for its students and students pay a percentage. I happen to know, Mr. President, that there is a leadership in the University of the West Indies that commits to ensuring that people have the ability to apply for, matriculate into, and graduate from the University of the West Indies, whatever their means. The University of the West Indies, at the Mona campus in particular, may be bursting at its seams with 20,000 odd students. The Cave Hill campus may now be finally beginning to recover with, I believe, 6,000 students, up from 4,000 students when tuition fees were removed. And we're going to see an expansion of that with an additional campus now being rolled out here in Barbados as part of the St. Joseph Hospital and the specialist services that are going to be there, including research and development. Now, Mr. President, the university has a philosophy. It's called a social justice philosophy. And if you listen to its leadership speaking, you would hear this social justice philosophy that always speaks to the importance of ensuring that poor people's children have access to education, that people who would not ordinarily have even dreamed of crossing the halls of a tertiary level institution have access to tertiary level institution, to their tertiary level education, that people who see no way out of their current circumstances are able to evolve as a result of access to tertiary level education. That is what the University of the West Indies represents to Caribbean people. That is where they are taking us as part of this new special purpose vehicle, which is meant to create opportunities for people. Now, how does the SPV work for the government of Barbados and for the university? When we talk about financial management, Mr. President, you know how sometimes you talk about asset rich and cash poor? The University of the West Indies is one of those entities that is asset rich and cash poor. It doesn't have the cash flow to be able to enable it to do all the things that it would want to do to afford access to as many people as it would want to do. But it has expansionary goals to be able to serve the Caribbean people. And so creating assets that are vested in the University of the West Indies that can then be monetized and leveraged for commercial purposes and to be able to access financing, whether by bond or any other means, whether it is by credit or by debt, whether it's by debt or by bond, then these are the kinds of initiatives that benefit this institution that has been critical to Caribbean civilization's development. This is what has helped to take many of us in this room forward. I stand here as a graduate of the University of the West Indies with 2 degrees. There are many people in this room who are here because there was a University of the West Indies, and we stand tall anywhere in the world, Mr. President, against graduates of other institutions anywhere else, with one of the best educations in the world and one of the best levels of exposure in the world, Mr. President, because there was a University of the West Indies. And so the government of Barbados has acknowledged that. This administration, the Mia Moore Motley-led administration in 2018, made the decision, and I believe it was one of the very first decisions of this administration, to reinstate tuition fees for University of the West Indies students, to ensure that Barbadians could return to the halls of the University of the West Indies with pride again and with the confidence that there would always be access for people. That has now been elevated, Mr. President, into a commercial partnership with the university. And I believe that I heard the Minister of Housing say in the other place that it is the expectation that the lands on which the entire university campus now sit, along with the lands at the Lazaretto, they are also intended to be vested. Now, this was a decision that had been taken by the late Right Honourable Owen Arthur in the last Barbados Labour Party administration. It sat unfinished over the last 10 years, and now with the Barbados Commission to finish that which we started, and to vest in the University of the West Indies the lands that it sits on in order to ensure that it is not just asset rich and cash poor, but it is able to leverage its assets to be able to generate the kind of liquidity and capital formation that is critical for an institution that we are depending on to take our Caribbean civilization, to take our Barbadian people into the next level of our development. And so, Mr. President, this is the resolution that is before us. First, the rescission of the lease for the American World Medical Clinic as at 2012 in order to allow for the vesting in the university in 2022 to take place for the St. Joseph Hospital. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummings. Senator Cummings. Senator Dr. Hines. You see, this is the right? Your Honor, Senator Thompson. Because the other people, the other people, okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. President. For the second time today, the Chamber is debating another plank of the building of our human and social capital, this time education. And these have been two consistent planks across the development spectrum for our country. And also for the second time today, I have the opportunity to speak on something which partly crossed my desk as a previous minister, in this case as Minister of Housing. But I speak today really as a proud graduate of the University of the West Indies, and in fact, the first female graduate of the University of the West Indies, the Cave Hill campus, and its Faculty of Law. The first female graduate to be a member of the Parliament of Barbados, to become a Minister of Government in Barbados. And you would think that it really was relatively recently, in relatively recent history. So it is with immense pride that and from several perspectives, that I attempt to make my contribution here today. So I From the perspective of having been a minister, I understand the importance of what we are doing by creating an asset base which the university can leverage for capital, for its building out and development. Because universities that have access to capital can not only have a strong research base, but then can go on to create programs and programs and courses and models that attract high-quality students, well-qualified students, and students that will then help to make the university recognized as one of the top and better performing universities in the world. Really, it is what you're doing is building out what would be called a virtuous circle, where you are creating one good and one benefit that then goes on and has beneficial impacts, greater beneficial impacts, exponential impacts, and so on. So I'm very supportive of this. In fact, I remember when I was housing minister, I took a walk one morning, sunny morning, with the leadership of the university. Sir Hilary was then principal, and others, and they wanted a small parcel of land off of Black Rock. And I said to him at the time, but we are amenable to giving you this, but why are you not more ambitious? And he looked at me puzzled, and I said, walk with me. And we walked. I had then started to gain weight, so I was a little out of breath, but we walked for some time. And since we have a pastor in this chamber, sir, I don't really want to sound like the devil tempting Jesus or showing him kingdoms, but at that time I showed the principal and the leadership of the university all the lands at the Lazaretto, which they did not know belonged to government at the time because it was only the Lazaretto compound. And I said, but all of these lands are the government lands, our government's lands. Why don't you expand your ambition and ask the government to give you all of this so that you could utilize it? So all of that land that is now being used at the Lazaretto, that started with that walk a morning. And then with my carrying to the cabinet a proposal, which I think, Your Honor, when you became housing minister, subsequently followed up on the cabinet paper that then granted access to all of those lands. If I may give another anecdote, because it is part of the history, and often that is the problem, that we don't write our history. So, and if there is no oral commentary on the history, then it is lost. When I became health minister, the Lazaretto, which had been set up in the days when leprosy was very much a stigmatized and feared disease, and we ostracized people or housed them in the Lazaretto so that they would not have contact with the rest of society. At that stage, there were only 3 people left in the Lazaretto. We now call it Hansen's disease. We treat it in the community. You don't know when people have leprosy. Our healthcare has improved. If they're caught early, they can be well managed and well treated. There were only 3 or 4 people in the institution at that time. And it was costing us thousands of dollars with full staff running 24 hours to care for these 3 people. And so I made a policy decision that they should be moved from there, and that facility then went into use and became the first residential facility in the Caribbean for people suffering from HIV and AIDS, which was then the stigmatized disease of the day, where people were putting you out, families were putting their family members out of their homes when they developed HIV and AIDS, and many of them were on the streets. They had nowhere to go, they were unable to work, and we had a full residential facility there for them. So by the time we took that walk that morning, we were then looking at treating the HIV in different ways, and the lands and property there could be made available to the university. So, at this end, at this time, and looking back and seeing the history and knowing the development and understanding the stages that it went through, I therefore want to locate my context, my comments today in the context of some of that history, and really to look to the future. And in that regard, I pose the question not just to the chamber and to the administration and to the university, but to the country. What is the future of the University of the West Indies as a development institution in our region? What is the future? What do we want our future to look like? For what are we training graduates? For instance, what kinds of civil services will we have in 10 years? Will our civil service be largely regulatory, so that you want scientists and people who will oversee things, who will stand at a console or a computer of some sort and check things using the technology? Will we still, as a region, as a nation, be involved in operational types of activities like delivering garbage, picking up garbage? Will we still be doing things like delivering water? Will that now become a technology-based service? Will it be something that will be privatized? How are these things to be managed? Because the kinds of decisions that we make as to what the civil service will look like, what the civil service is going to do, what the optimal size of the civil service will be, will determine who we train and how we train and what we train for. And when we make the decisions about how we see our future as a people, to what extent will what we do be technology driven? Is it going to be grounded on coding, for instance? What are going to be the planks of development for which the university has to train people? I have no doubt that the time will come when we will not train as many lawyers, but we will train more people with computer skills. I have no doubt that the time will come when a major plank of revenue generation for the University of the West Indies will become the fastest, will be in what has become the fastest growing niche in technology. That's education and edutainment. That is where the university needs to go. And particularly now coming out of COVID, when we see that so many classes are online, the university is hustling to get people back into the seats at the university for obvious reasons. You have space, you need to get seats, bottoms in seats. But the reality is that the university should be looking to build out its technological capability and looking to attract more students online, because particularly for the mature student who has a family already, who is working and wants to train at night or on weekends, sitting down in front of the computer while you nurse the baby, having your phone propped up next to the utility bin or the container that holds your pot spoons and so on, as you cook and listen to your class. Or if you are a man, you might be out in your garden or whatever it is men do in the evenings, looking after the dogs. Or I know that women can do those kinds of things. I'm not too sure all of the activities that men spend their time with. But the point that I'm making simply is that as a mature student, it allows you to get on with the child care, with the granny care, with the home care, with all your additional chores and responsibilities while learning. The headphones can be in your ear while you are digging the garden. And therefore, the university should be seeking to build out that technological capability and attracting students online. And they can get students from all over the world, because since the university is now ranked on the Times list of universities of a certain reputation, they are now better recognized globally and are far more likely to be able to attract a larger student body, a more diverse student body from all over the globe, and people are willing to pay for education. I did 2 master's degrees, partly online, and had to pay for them. They weren't done with UE, and therefore they had to be paid for up front. And in the same way that I had to max out my credit card and pay, other people have had to do this. And therefore UE must capture that market, which is a captive market. People aren't just looking to do long-term courses, they're looking to do short-term courses as well. So what is the future of the university as a development institution? I think too that there are other questions that we need to ask. Sorry, I didn't know if the voice was encouraging me to speak more, suggesting that I stop. So what is it that we are training people for? What is the future of work? We've been talking a lot about the future of work and how what we saw as the future of work has been accelerated into the now of work. But as that changes and continues to change rapidly, the future of work has got to be prepared for by the university, or rather, the university has to prepare the student body and the nation and the region for the future of work, whatever that future will be. And I think that at this stage, we are at a pivotal point at which there must be critical discussions on how we are seeing our future, how we are defining our future, how we are planning for our future, but most important, how we are using our national institutions to prepare for that future. What is the future of the university as a development institution? I am happy to see this matter before the House today for 2 other reasons. All over Barbados, we have a tremendous amount of vacant property, of properties laying idle. St. Joseph Hospital was one of them. And there have been efforts by successive administrations to put it into use. I'm not going to speak to the politics of what happened in the past, but there have been efforts by successive administrations to put it into use. And therefore, to see that it is now going to be vested in the university and the university given an opportunity for partnership and for effective utilization and beneficial utilization of that property for the people of Barbados is quite heartwarming. But we also have to have a plan for how we use government property that is not our taxpayers' property, which is what it is, that is not in productive use. We are too small a country to allow so much property. And you drive all over Barbados, you see houses overgrown with bush, houses falling down. Sometimes it is because there's dispute over estates and wills in the family. Family members have gone away and have not been able to find the resources, or in the cases of places like Bank Hall and so on, where these were once substantive properties or substantial properties rather, the family's circumstances have changed and they can no longer afford to upkeep them. You see that in Strathclyde, you see it in Belleville. We have to develop a plan, however, for all of this property that is lying idle and decaying and forming habitats for rodents and for rats of various types to utilize. We really have to address that. In a small landmass, where land is a scarce resource, where property is a scarce resource, we have to ensure that we maintain it and maximize its use for the benefit of the wider public, particularly when that is property being held on trust by government for the taxpayers. What type of training is our region going to need? What kinds of skills and attitude will we need for productivity and competitiveness in the global marketplace? It is true that students of the University of the West Indies can hold their own with universities from all over the world, although I have to admit that I come across quite a few who cannot seem to write basic English, but that is another point. I already spoke to the future of work and the use of technology. To what extent is the university going to become technology-driven in the way that it delivers its programs, in the programs that it develops, not just for the students, but in the way that it does its business generally? Are we training people, and are we investing skills in our population for national and regional benefit, or for export, so that we repatriate the benefits, whether it is capital that they're going to send home, whether they're going to buy property here, however those benefits are repatriated? Because this is an important consideration. It has to do with our national and regional human resource planning. What is it that we are training people for? Will we train enough people that our economy can absorb them? And that is a problem that we have today, that we are training a lot of people, and yet a person was speaking to me, they had studied journalism. And they were complaining that they could not get a job. And I asked them, but if you consider the few media houses we have in Barbados, when all of them are full, what did you think you were going to do with a journalism degree? How can you become more entrepreneurial, especially in an online market, when people are doing blogs, when people are selling information, when people are monetizing data and information? How are you going to use your journalism degree? Because there is limited scope for journalists in Barbados, because the number of our media houses is limited and finite. This isn't like we have the BBC or CNN, when they will have reporters based all over the world and so on. So what numbers are we training, and what are we training them for? How do we also teach these people to be more entrepreneurial, so that when they leave university with all this training and skill, they don't expect that they can walk into a job the next morning in a small economy with a small workforce, that they will be able to take that training and use it to generate revenues, foreign exchange for the country, revenues for themselves, income for themselves, without looking to somebody or some entity to employ them. And I think that there is a gap between how we train, who we train, what we train for, and our national human resource needs, human resource assessments, and human resource planning, as well as how the student or the graduate views themselves as a graduate, and what their role is, or how they can earn a living other than by becoming somebody's employee. And I move then to what is the second part of my speech, because I saw it. I always have more to say than I seem to have time for, but 10 minutes. Okay, sir. So, to use those 10 minutes allocated to me then, for the second part of my speech. As in the case of the hospital, and it is really interesting that both of these issues have come before the chamber today. As in the case of the hospital, the question of financing and innovative financing becomes relevant. To what extent can the university generate its own revenues? To what extent can it become a major foreign exchange earner for the country? I've already made the point about using online education, which is a rapidly growing niche in the technology market. In fact, it was not anticipated initially that technology would be so widely utilized for education, but that is how it has developed, and luckily so for many of us who worked and did degrees at the same time. But I want to make some other suggestions by way of innovative financing. The university as University of the West Indies as an entity has a foundation in the United States. I think an opportunity is being missed here. Amazon has, I don't want to call it a program, but there is a component of Amazon where if you are a registered United States foundation, you can get a space on Amazon. Perhaps I'm framing this badly. You can apply to Amazon for, let's say, them to put on an additional cost of a cent or penny, as the Americans say, on an item. And that item, that cost can go to your foundation. It will say that this is what the penny is being asked for. Pretty much like if you go to Macy's in New York or some other store and they ask you, would you like to round, and your bill comes to $4.75, and they ask you, would you like to round that off by making a contribution to the Cancer Society or veterans or veterinarians or animals and so on. It is a similar sort of program that Amazon has. I don't know all of the details. I don't know recall them, but I know a friend had explained it to me, and at one time I was going to suggest it as part of the way in which UE could help to earn funds, because they already have the foundation in the United States. The mechanism exists that they can use, and Amazon sells billions of dollars in goods, so that it could easily generate significant revenues for the University of the West Indies. I think that the university has also, may I suggest, I don't like to say I think, may I suggest that the university could monetize some of the work being done by its students. Senator Cummins, the Honorable Senator Cummins, spoke to the monetization of patents and so on, but this is a valuable area, copyrights, the commercialization of patents, and in fact, the monetization of gaming. As far as I'm aware, we have students in the university who do things like gaming and coding. Farmville used to be the most popular game on Facebook. You had it generating billions of dollars for the owners of Facebook. You had billions of people across the world playing farming. I never quite understood why you would want somebody, or why you would be prepared to pay to look after artificial chicken, but there were people who were prepared to do it. And interestingly enough, the average player of Farmville was a 45-year-old female. When you would think that the people who are engaged in all the gaming are young males, that really middle-aged people. Pardon? No. If I had to check, I would eat chicken. I wasn't raising the artificial chickens, the virtual chickens. And I never, my grandmother used to have chickens, and I grew up not liking chickens and birds, so I would try sheep, but but not chicken. I don't like chicken. Sorry. Sir, I ask the people in the pit to not interfere. Sir, we must have moments of levity, and I know that you appreciate them. But the point that I'm making is, whatever the game, and there are various types, Warcraft, etc., there is absolutely no reason why the students of the University of the West Indies cannot develop a game during the time that they are students, that we cannot put it online and sell it and monetize it, particularly given all the platforms available, with the revenues being shared between the initiators or the developers and the University of the West Indies. That kind of output and practical knowledge and work should be encouraged. Because if we encourage it, then people see themselves as entrepreneurs, of the innovators, the originators of something new and exciting. And we don't always look for it to come from outside of the region or from outside of ourselves. We understand that we have the capacity to innovate, to be first to the market, to be pioneers. And there's a lot of interesting work going on that isn't being monetized. There's research in the University of the West Indies that isn't being monetized. People cannot be doing these things for some kind of intellectual stimulation only. It has to be to the financial advantage of the university and the economic advantage of the region. And that is what I want to encourage. There are mechanisms like micro donations and national funding days and major fundraisers that I don't hear the UE having. There is the opportunity with the training of medical students for medical tourism, for people to come down here in the final stages of care for various types of illnesses or injuries and be looked after, but that would require, of course, negotiation and relationships with the international insurance companies. But it is possible to do these things. We just have to make the effort. Foreign students are a significant source of revenue for British universities and should in fact be a significant source of revenue and foreign exchange for the University of the West Indies. Equally, there is the floating of diaspora bonds for university education. And many people, including former university graduates, would be happy to contribute. I am not sure that we well utilize well our UE diaspora and our Caribbean diaspora for the generation of revenues and for repatriating benefits to the University of the West Indies. And that is something that we need to consider. Foreign universities also use fundraisers, individuals who have responsibility for fundraising, who go to work every day to tap the diaspora, to tap the business sector, to tap endowments and to set up endowments, to attract funding to the university for research. That is what they do. So it isn't all left to happenstance. It isn't left to government. It isn't left to goodwill. That persons can be specifically targeted to fund activity, to fund learning, to fund training, to fund facilities in the University of the West Indies. I know that some of this has taken place, but I do not think that it has been taken to the absolute strategic targeted approach that obtains in foreign universities which have no resources from government, so they have to look for sources of funding. If we didn't have a source of funding here, perhaps we would become more aggressive in terms of our fundraising. So some of these are mechanisms which can be used to bring capital, to generate capital for the university, to create. Honorable Senator Cummins has spoken, and for some time, this is something about which I've been happy to hear, something around which I have made speeches in the past. And now that we have had now that we've had COVID and are utilizing the technology for so many more activities, the notion of a virtual tourism product is something that the university can be leading on. I am sure that there are those who have visited Barbados, who are excited by the notion of Barbados, who hope to visit Barbados, would be willing to pay some small sum to have Barbadian-type activities online, to access them, to have a virtual Barbados address, to participate in a virtual a virtual crop over, to have an avatar. Because basically this is what they use in the various Warcraft and other games. They have these avatars that have these alternate lives. And we should be selling an alternate Barbados in not negative alternate lives. I see a senator smirking. I hope that is not from secret knowledge of any alternate life that he may have. But they have alternate lives on virtually, which creates diversions and pleasant activity for them. And equally, I'm saying that we can create a virtual tourism product, and this can come out of the bosom of the university, where we are training students not only in tourism, but in the technology, in gaming, in coding, etc. So all the skills reside there, but we are not harnessing them in the direction of revenue generation and foreign exchange earning that will benefit the university or will benefit the country. And I think that that is a direction in which we need to go. I believe, sir, that I have used the 10 minutes which you said that I had, and therefore, sir, I will close with the question with which I started. What will be the future and role of the University of the West Indies in building out our human and social capital as a core institution of Barbadian national and Caribbean regional life, in developing us for the future, in preparing us for the future, in ensuring our productivity, our competitiveness, and our success? And what will be the role of the institution in a redefined, reinvigorated, re-energized University of the West Indies, in elevating the region and the people of the region to give us a pride of place that is enviable across the globe? Much obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Your Honour. Senator Thompson. Speakers on the independent side. Senator Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. I shall not exceed 10 minutes. Mr. President, I am old enough, and I think that can be seen in my hair, to remember St. Joseph Hospital. And I remembered it as the hospital in the north in its old incarnation as a private hospital. And then during my training in Scotland, it was reopened under the control of the then government. When it closed and there was an inquiry, Mr. President, I remembered recording certain numbers, and I looked at whether this hospital had any impact on anything. If anything, it said that the hospital was a bold attempt to change things. I will not speak to the outcome and how it was managed, but it said that we didn't have to do everything in the QEH. That hospital in its time, and I'm not going to comment on its efficiency and its cost, had, any time it ran, had about 2,000 admissions, I'm told, for the numbers that I kept, and it had done, by the time it closed in February '95, just over 1,000 operations. But two things came from that hospital. There was the start of laparoscopic surgery in Barbados and joint surgery. So even after it was closed and it's been left for all these years, I am really pleased that government has come up with a plan to once again have that site used for something useful other than the monkeys. And the Prime Minister, when she spoke in another place, spoke about internships. And I felt that, for me, that was a powerful thing, because we've had the problem here of matching the number of students to patient ratios in hospitals that meet the accreditation standards, and also the problem of finding internship positions for everyone. And the Prime Minister spoke about whether, when you get a degree in medicine, whether your university should have a responsibility for make sure that you can work. And I think she correctly said that, yes, it is disingenuous to say, we only give you a degree, but you have to find an internship. Maybe in any other country you can find one. And if the bed capacity was increased in a hospital, another hospital in Barbados, maybe the issues that we still currently have with finding internship space for young doctors might be resolved. So from the point of view of seeing persons give their all in medicine as students and then graduate and not being able to finish the internship and get a job where they're unsupervised, I think that the possibility exists that if this facility did go back to being a hospital of some type, that may end. In terms of bed capacity, and I'm speaking about this purely in terms of medicine, this country, there's lots of debate about whether we need more beds. What we need really to understand is what our outcomes are and whether we're doing it efficiently. And the world has changed and continues to change. Mr. President, when I was an intern not so long ago, it was impossible to even contemplate that a patient would have a blood transfusion at home as an outpatient service. And that is the norm now. The length of time that you spend in hospital has changed radically. When I was an intern, a person coming in for thyroid surgery spent 5 days in hospital. Now they spend less than 24 hours. And it's a reflection of the improved social circumstances and the efficiencies in the hospital and probably the quality of surgeons that we have and all the other staff inputs and stuff like that. So I don't think that we can plan medicine for tomorrow as a day. You have to plan it 20 years down the line, but you really can't see 20 years down the line. So you have to plan it not with an end point, but you have to plan it and think about the people that's going to affect. And you have to look for areas that will benefit the local population, whether it is because there'll be tourists coming to have medical care or people from other islands, and you have the capacity then to develop certain services locally. For example, Mr. President, there's some medical services, particularly oncology services, that based on our population size, we probably couldn't do efficiently for cost, because we don't have enough people to do it. But if we build out a service that attracted people, it might be economical to have a PET scan in Barbados and bring unit costs down enough that people can afford it. And all the people who previously could not get them or had to fly overseas could get them locally. Similarly, we give radiation therapy with a cobalt machine, which is quite an old technique. Current standard is a linear accelerator. So if you're going to have the investment in medicine, we need to have more people. And this vesting with the UWI, along with all the other medical development, which you must bear in mind, if it is coordinated, could be a success. The matter of Harrison Point, Mr. President, is a huge one to consider, because government has spent large sums of money in the infrastructure in Harrison Point. And there's some who think that it will make an excellent tourist facility, but not everything can be pure tourism. And medical tourism, including rehabilitation, might be worthwhile things to consider. But Mr. President, when we do these development, we must not kill local success. There are smaller players and smaller institutions that have survived because, not because they didn't have competition, but because they were able to mark a space for themselves and grow in it. And medicine has changed enough that procedures that used to be done by a surgeon are now being done by a radiologist. And rather than spending 5 days in the hospital, you spend 6 hours and go home. So when we get advice, Mr. President, on these matters, it should not only be from those from, as they say in some countries, another country, a foreign. We must use the local expertise, because we've had successes and we've had failures. But today, Mr. President, I am pleased that in my time, I would have seen an institution that was closed and left closed by successive administrations, possibly now, to be reactivated and probably have a long life. And when the history is written, we'll have to look back at the people who did it, who brought it to where it was, the original owners, and all those, including the governments that played a part in establishing a hospital. And I wish the UWI all success. And if the UWI will become a global university, it has to think big, and it needs space. And space isn't only on a computer and virtual. Treating people cannot only be virtual, it has to be real, be human contact. And Senator Cummins this morning talked about all those who were affected by being withdrawn and separated. And it is real, Mr. President. So the notion that we can do everything virtually is just an avatar. It's not real. We need human contact. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator, Mr. Maynard. Senator Hayward.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to begin by first joining yourself and other members that have gone before by welcoming Senator Hines and Senator Brathwaite to this august chamber. I have not had the pleasure of having an individual conversation with you, but given your backgrounds and knowledge in various capacities, I look forward to a wealth of knowledge for which you will transfer around this chamber as we proceed. Mr. President, I believe that we are all creatures of the past, and as such, I commit to the well-known saying that to know where we're going, we must know where we are, and to know where we are, we must know where we have been. It is against that backdrop of where we have been in particular, Mr. President, that I begin with a focus on the history of Ashton Hall related to the resolution before us. Ashton Hall, which is equally as rich and vibrant as any other parcel of land in this country, once owned and operated out of the reach of many of our ancestors, many of whom were once considered to be movable chattel. The entirety of the land, Mr. President, at Ashton Hall was initially once owned by the Dewsbury family between 1674 and 1695. Then to the Maynard family, I don't know if there's any relation to Senator Maynard, up to 1734. They encountered tax issues and subsequently fell victim to the common pleas levy, of course, to the benefit of Thomas Withers and Mr. Thomas Harrison, who were business partners and merchant planters from the St. Michael district. Now, the firm that these two gentlemen established was known to be a correspondent of Mr. Humphrey Maurice, a British merchant, a member of parliament, and also a former governor of the Bank of England, who was deeply involved in the Atlantic slave trade. To that extent, Mr. President, the history of Ashton Hall is anointed to some extent in joint ventures. Although in the case of my example, it was perhaps the most unforgivable venture of physical and economic exploitation. Fast forward 200 years or so, Mr. President, then of course we come to the well-known to and fro, or political football as some people call it, of the saga related to the St. Joseph Hospital, a situation of which for many years appeared to be descending into a political wilderness that offered no value, in my opinion, or assurance to our country with regards to some of the discussions and differences. In following Senator Brathwaite's earlier contribution, I want also to quote the words of Mahatma Gandhi as an applicable posit that on this matter, when he said, "An eye for an eye only ends up making the world blind," and I reference that with respect to the to and fro and the political football that this situation would have descended into. And indeed, one may argue that a temporary lapse of vision may have ensued throughout the course of the verbal conflict. Nonetheless, Mr. President, this period forms a crucial part of our history, and while I do not want to dwell on the misfortunes of the past and sprinkle salt on any possible open wounds, I certainly do not want to do that, lest we forget that those disruptions hospital, particularly within the period of 1986, January, that was really not an act of the then government, the Barbados Labour Party government, but more so it was a result of a refusal, Mr. President, to participate in what I considered after my research to be a reckless and perhaps a financially inappropriate process that could only arouse further suspicion around this matter. As I look around this chamber, I know that some may recall those times in January 1986, Mr. President. I certainly cannot. I was actually born in January 1986, January 3rd to be exact. But thankfully, the records have been well kept and preserved by the competent staff of this Parliament over the years, and I've made myself available to access them. Many may recall also from the debates that follow a vivid recollection of events as is documented in Hansard. In particular, I wish to draw the attention to a brief contribution of former NDP Member of Parliament for St. Michael's South Central, Dr. Richie Haynes, when he said, and he was not a member of the Barbados Labour Party, if I must add, he said the St. Joseph Hospital is a good capital investment. It is not worth any $15 million, and I will oppose very much any proposal to purchase the St. Joseph Hospital for $15 million. So I think it would be a waste of time even considering paying any $15 million for any hospital of that kind. And for reference, and to be accurate and follow protocol, that was a debate in the other place on December 17, 1985, page 3136 of the Hansard. Also documented in that debate, Mr. President, on the House of Assembly, that debate of the other place, this time on Tuesday, December 15, 1987, the former representative for St. Peter and late former Prime Minister, Professor the Right Honourable Owen Seymour Arthur, laid out the case for the government in terms of why the requested support could not occur at that time. And I know I speak, Mr. President, to most of those in my generation who may not have been acquainted with much of the deliberations of the time. So I'm hoping that those who are more aware would bear with me very briefly. It was November 1985, by way of a meeting by the then MP for St. Peter, also at the time the Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, and persons acting on behalf of the St. Joseph Hospital, that the government was made aware of an irreversible decision made by the owners of the St. Joseph Hospital to close the hospital on January 19, 1986, and that they were asking for the same $15 million to which the former member that I mentioned earlier, Dr. Richie Haynes, that he quoted. But the truth of the matter was that the government of the day was in no position, Mr. President, to commit to such an amount in short notice, a transaction of that magnitude without going through the proper processes, and that was the bulk of the issue. So the long and short surrounding the controversy at that time, sir, was whether or not the government should have committed $15 million of taxpayers' money without conducting proper evaluations of the property or the value of the property, and just throw the money or commit the money to the property without following those protocols that are established to protect the interests of Barbadians. And of course, January the 19th came and January the 19th went by. And the political football kept being kicked thereafter, much to the dislike of the innocent bystanders who we ultimately serve, the people of Barbados. Then in 2012, we had the government move in the passing of a resolution to approve the lease of 21.5 acres of land at the same location as the honorable leader of government business has mentioned, and the property to be leased for a period of 25 years with an option to renew for a further 25 years. The center was expected to open in 2014, as was established in previous contributions that never materialized. But interestingly enough, it was to house a $160 million hospital, a clinic, health and wellness center, recovery facilities, and other related facilities in health science and biotechnology for international visitors and locals alike. It sounds very good, very attractive, Mr. President, but I still believe that if I had to weigh the options between that previous option and what exists today with regards to the University of West Indies, that the UWI would have been a far better and a more sustainable option for the people of Barbados and the Caribbean. It is after researching, understanding, and reflecting on the history of activities related to this location that a sense of pride now emerges in the present as I raise to support yet another joint venture on the very spot, and this time one that seeks to advance the cause of all people in Barbados and this region, and not just a select few. Of course, this venture, as has been mentioned, is the special purpose vehicle for which approval is now being sought and for which the government and the University of West Indies have expressed mutual interest in pursuing, with a capitalization schedule of 25% and 75% respectively. Mr. President, there is no need for me to detail the types and the depths of support that the University of West Indies has provided over the years to the government of Barbados and its people. It goes without saying. However, Mr. President, despite the regional and international acclaim of the institution, there often persists a perception of a relationship between the government and the University of the West Indies, which seems to present the scholarly institution as being a reflection of the government's fiscal position at any given time. Put more frankly, a relationship of overwhelming dependence. We know too well, Mr. President, the implications of any entity, whether it be commercial or academia, being subject to the state transfers to achieve its objectives. With an institution like the University of West Indies, it means not only that its operations can be disrupted abruptly, but also the livelihoods of many of our own people who seek to take advantage of our world-renowned tertiary level educational institution. Mr. President, this resolution reminds me of an old Chinese proverb. Excuse me, please. This resolution reminds me of an old Chinese proverb, well known to many of us in this chamber. Give a man a fish, and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, and you feed him for a lifetime. Essentially, that is what we are seeking to do essentially, that is what this initiative is seeking to do in terms of placing University of West Indies on a more diversified footing by advancing the fixed assets portfolio of its balance sheet in the form of lands being made available, thereby better equipping the institution to pursue open market operations with a greater degree of collateral. With the vast majority of the equitable interest in this venture swaying to the side of the UWI, which is 75%, the likelihood is that, and as the leader of government business has explained in detail, the likelihood is that UWI will take up the lead on most matters relating to the strategy of utilizing the spatial asset. Mr. President, this is what I would say, a responsible government does with regards to ensuring that these institutions that play a critical role in the region can stand on their own 2 feet or transition to a place where they can stand on their own 2 feet. No responsible government would throw its hands in the air because of limited resources and then totally sever the relationship that exists between itself and UWI. To do so would be catastrophic for future students and the institution itself, Mr. President. Instead, the approach allows for greater collaboration between government and the freedom on the part of the UWI to enter into further collaborations to build out a facility on the land to help reinforce the country in the long term against serious medical threats. Indeed, sir, this resolution subscribes to the philosophy of teaching a man how to fish. Before the debate this morning, I actually took a stroll up to Ashton Hall before I came down here. And it was quite interesting, Mr. President, to look at the facility because I wanted an understanding of 3 things. I wanted an understanding of what was, what is today, and what could be. And of the 3 focuses, I would say, points of focus, I would say, what could be was the most interesting one to me. And this is an approach, Mr. President, if I may credit to you, as it was formed in a discussion with you on approaches dealing with land resolutions, to which you guided me to, if possible, take a visit to the locations to which the resolutions are being focused. On leaving the location, while I was driving, I thought again about what could be. As I drove past communities near Warrens, Husbands, Oxnard, and Black Rock, excuse me, Mr. President. As I drove past the communities near Warrens, Husbands, Oxnard, and Black Rock, I found myself wondering about the scale of livelihood improvements that were netted due to the very establishment of the University of the West Indies in Cave Hill. The number of rapidly expanding landlords that helped to satisfy the excess demand for accommodation for those visiting students and teachers. The number of restaurants and other nearby food service enterprises that help in providing sustenance to the minds of the academia. The number of jobs provided to help maintain and secure that campus at UWI Cave Hill. Mr. President, this is the other aspect of this resolution that stimulates my interest more. Not just the likelihood of building something made out of concrete and probably some wood and other textures and whatever look the decision makers are speaking about, but the impact it will have on the surrounding community. The same way how the University of West Indies Cave Hill had a noticeable impact on the surrounding communities as well. The opportunities that can be provided by just establishing an operational facility related to this university definitely are endless. When I spoke to a couple of residents out there, I get the impression, Mr. President, that they too look forward to any type of development of this kind. In particular, I visited a good friend of mine who's from Mount Brever. He is involved in masonry and maintenance, and when I spoke to him about the possibility of something happening up there, he was very much interested in getting some work up there as well. I went up to Whitehall. I spoke to a lady out there who has a small food establishment, very much interested in providing catering services should this come into fruition in the near future. I spoke to numerous establishments across Speightstown, and I finished at the Speightstown fish market as well. And it's very interesting to hear the leader of government business mention that the focus is going to be on diabetes, or one of the key focuses is going to be on diabetes, because we all know the usefulness of fish with regards to being one of those recommended foods with regards to persons who suffer from diabetes. So I think that is an interesting linkage within the nearby vicinity. So, Mr. President, the resolution is not only about the physical and spatial parameters being transferred to UE, not for those of us who give consideration to what could be. It is about advancing livelihoods and providing opportunities for all Barbadians. Now, it is not my place to dictate the perception of the public, Mr. President, but I see this resolution as my internal declaration of the final whistle being blown on an exhausted political football with regards to the St. Joseph Hospital. I really see it as the final whistle being blown on this game. While allowing the university to become better and allowing persons to explore opportunities to enhance the livelihoods of Barbadians and others across the region. I am quite certain, Mr. President, that our forefathers, regardless of the political orientation, would look upon this special purpose vehicle with great admiration and commend the government for this initiative. The progress of this joint venture for me will form part of a notable case study and reference point as I wonder about what could be again. What could be, Mr. President, with respect to establishing even a sovereign wealth fund in Barbados and utilizing this very modality of a special purpose vehicle to grow wealth for our nation. This debate and discussion with regards to the sovereign wealth fund, I may have in another time, perhaps in another place, but Mr. President, it is essential that we start this process. For this and many other reasons mentioned before, Mr. President, I give my support to this resolution before the Chamber. Thank you, Mr. President. I extend full gratitude for your indulgence. I am obliged.
Thank you, Senator Herod. Senator Maladu.
Mr. President, thank you for recognizing me. First of all, let me just say that I rise in my real life and not in my alternate life. And not as an avatar, although there have been times earlier that today where perhaps I thought I was. Very briefly, first of all, my understanding is that on both these matters, which we will vote on separately, we can speak to them as one. So I understand we're talking about the rescinding of the lease and secondly, putting that newly liberated property to good use. So firstly, on the rescinding of the lease, what I would like to contribute is what can we learn from this? Because for the last 10 years, apparently, this property has been subject to a lease and subject to non-performance, frankly, of that lease. So we could say that perhaps it was an error of the last administration, previous, or however is the correct way of saying it, the administration who entered into that lease. It was an error. Or perhaps it was a good idea that was badly timed. But in any case, the reality is that 10 years on, what we thought was going to happen there, which seemed like a good idea, it seemed at the time, didn't happen. So, as a real estate practitioner, I wonder if there is not something we should learn from that. Should we really enter into agreements like this that don't have some performance aspect, such that we can get out of them should they not perform in the way that we expected? That's just the first point on rescinding of the lease, which I totally and completely support. On the second point, which is putting this property to good use, since everyone has recounted, or many of my fellow honourable senators have recounted what they remember of the property, I do remember what I was doing in 1986, frankly, and it was not being born. It was graduating from university, but I only have two memories of this facility. One, my uncle was treated for a collapsed lung there, and I must have been very, very young. But I remember also that my father-in-law tells me, Dr. Hoyos, that he traveled from Chantry Lane, where he lived, to St. Joseph Hospital almost on a daily basis as an anesthesiologist. And it was a very long drive because there was no highway. And he tells us of that quite often, of leaving at 4 or 4:30 in the morning. But I know that a lot of people were treated there, and it was an extremely good facility, and it did very well for the northern part of the island. So it is really regretful that it is not, all through all these years, is not being to good use. So I will support as well the second part, which is to put this asset of Barbados to good use. But I do think that we need to think carefully about what responsibility we have for performance on this, and what contemplation has been put into this special purpose vehicle for what if it does not end up being what we thought it was going to be. Is there any performance aspect to this? Because we are giving up 75% of the ownership of this asset, and I would hope that in the commercial terms that will be determined by that other place, I guess, or cabinet, or whoever determines that they would contemplate some period of time within which this asset of the people of Barbados will be put to good use. And should it not be, that there would then be some way of not waiting 10 years to have to rescind something else. So with those few comments, I would say I support both the rescinding of the lease and the vesting it in the special purpose vehicle in the hope that there will be some performance aspect to it. With those few words, I shall let my avatar have a seat now. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Maloney, for that wonderful contribution. Senator Hines?
Thank you, Mr. President. Initially, I did not really want to speak on this topic. I feel somewhat conflicted as a current employee of the University of the West Indies, so I do not necessarily want to speak on the institution's affairs, in particular because I am in no way involved in any of this. Although people know me to be a head of department, that sounds wonderful, but it really is kind of a middle management position in which I'm not privy to certain decisions. So I just want to get that out of the way before saying what I am going to say. I do not have any inside knowledge of what has occurred here. I was born at St. Joseph Hospital. Yeah, so clearly it was an excellent hospital. I won't say when, but clearly that was sometime before 1986. It was in the 80s. I slightly can remember 1986, very slightly. So that, I don't have any memories of St. Joseph Hospital, but because I was born there, over my life, I remember thinking I would love to see it return to use. And it has been out of use for quite some time, and I think it is an excellent idea to put it to good use. And therefore, I support this special purpose vehicle. I support the University of the West Indies being the entity that will be able to make use of this facility. So there are some things I wanted to respond to. First of all, the university is going through what it is calling a revenue revolution. And there is the expectation that the university will earn a lot more than it currently does and be less dependent on the governments of the region. This expectation is a 50-50, well, 50% support from the government of the region and 50% from other sources, including students, the private sector, and the university generating revenue itself. But I want to say, in response to some of the things that I have heard, that there is a lot of research that comes out of the UWI. There's a lot of innovation, and a lot of this is already monetized. Perhaps not to the extent that some would like, but we need to bear in mind that my experience of the UWI, I have worked there since 2006. I was not an undergraduate student there. I didn't do most of my studies at UWI. I did do a certificate in university teaching and learning, so I am a graduate, even though I only went there for a short time. But my experience is that the UWI, as well known as it is, and I would assert that it is already a global university with an excellent reputation, even before we entered a ranking exercise. The University of the West Indies is almost a bare bones operation. Anytime there is a review of a discipline in which we bring in persons from outside, we are told that it is a wonder that the university is able to produce what it produces with the staffing complement. In particular, I would say the academic component that is required to do so much with truly very little. We are required to do research, teaching, public service, outreach, university service, and these are things that at other universities are split up among different members of staff. So I wanted to say some of that just to assure everyone here that the UWI is already doing good work and does not need to learn how to fish. It can fish already, but what it requires is a fishing boat. And this is what I see this St. Joseph Hospital potentially being, this fishing boat, but it is one that I suspect is in disrepair. I have a little bit of a concern about what it will take to move this hospital that has not been used for quite some time to what we expect it to be. This will also require some investment, and I hope that this element of this arrangement is taken very seriously, and we are not left with another asset that is overgrown, sitting down for years, with people wondering how we will make effective use of it. I hope that it will be put to good use for the healthcare sector. I also, in thinking to the previous debate about the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, I would love to see a healthcare facility in the north that stops us being so reliant on just our Queen Elizabeth Hospital in town, in Bridgetown. All right. There's something else I wanted to say too on this matter. And although I think this is very useful, I would like for us to think about this beyond monetization, because there is value in this beyond whatever the University of the West Indies may be able to gain financially to support itself. There is greater value in this. I think we need to move beyond a neoliberal conception of universities and education, which see them as just putting out things, items to be sold. Education for sale, a degree, a diploma, a certificate, a short course, an innovation, someone's idea. These are things that are saleable, but are not only valuable because they can be sold. Some of these things have to be publicly available, and that is the purpose of the UWI. It is a public institution. It is public for the region. And some of what it produces, some of what it offers to this region must be part of a regional commons and a global commons. So here I'm talking about the research that is going to be produced, the innovations. All of these cannot be for sale. Some of this is for the benefit of the region and this country, so that the value that can come from this is not just in dollars and cents. It is not just about the university supporting itself, but the greater value it will offer our country and this region. And these are things that I don't think we can put price tags on. Finally, I want to say that UWI is a labyrinth. It is a fine institution, but it is one that I cannot easily comprehend myself. There are many elements to its operations, and some of the things I've heard here make me think that we perhaps do not fully comprehend all that the UWI does, as frustrating as it can be to be there sometimes. It does have online components. It long has had these before the COVID-19 pandemic. It has offered education online. It offers outreach. It offers services. And I fully support this resolution that will allow the UWI to continue to do this, not just for money, not just to support itself, but for the betterment of this country and the region. Mr. President, thank you very much. I'm obliged to you.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Hines. The speakers, Senator Nichols, you're still speaking? No, sorry. Bradford. Senator Dr. Bradford.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The resolution which is before us, in my view, speaks to a new strategic partnership between the university and the government of Barbados. Like my colleague, Senator, I too was not planning to speak, as I did not have the time to study the proposal in great depth. But as a graduate of the University of the West Indies, I feel it is incumbent on me to say a few words about what I see as a very positive development in the journey of the university. Mr. President, I see this as the university becoming more of a development institution and less of an institution that only produces graduates in specific fields or does research to be published in international scientific journals. I see this as an initiative that brings the university in contact with the development issues and the challenges that Barbados faces going forward. I see this, therefore, Mr. President, as the university being a development institution, a dimension for its future that is critical, where the university not only produces graduates, but also promotes the development of enterprises that contribute to the development of our country. Mr. President, this is becoming a new dimension of university development, not only here in the Caribbean, but around the world, where the university becomes a place for the generation of ideas and the implementation of those ideas and strategies in an entrepreneurial way that contributes to the economic development of the countries in which they're based, not only producing human resources, which is critical, but also contributing to development of enterprises that can in fact generate wealth, employment, and growth for our economies. In fact, Mr. President, in many universities today, professors are being provided with development funds that will allow them to monetize their ideas, monetize their research findings, monetize the products of their investigation to create enterprises that are associated with the university. And some universities have in fact developed foundations specifically designed to work with the private sector to create these linkages between academia and the private sector and the real world, and at the same time the university becomes a place of innovation, a place of enterprise, a place of growth, and a place to make a contribution to the development of the societies in which they function. And so, Mr. President, I believe there's fertile ground for UWI to partner with the government in even more strategic areas than what we hear of today. And in this particular one that has to do with health, there's clearly a need in Barbados to tackle the challenges of non-communicable diseases in a society where it has been recognized that 8 out of 10 deaths are due to these diseases, and where obesity among children is high. In some cases, over 30% of our children are obese. the challenge that we have of tackling these diseases is real. And I think a partnership with the university in this resolution to treat with health issues that confront our country, and in which there'll be leverage of resources, the physical resources and appropriate financial resources to develop a new partnership that can redound the development of our society is indeed a worthy enterprise and one that deserves our support. I have no doubt, Mr. President, that this is just the beginning of a new dimension in strategic partnerships between the government and the university. We're working together, focusing on critical development issues the university can bring to bear, can bring to the table, knowledge, experience, expertise, and international support that can help to revolutionize our development agenda. And so, with these few words, Mr. President, I feel confident that this is a step in the right direction and one that will redound to the benefit of the government and people of Barbados by its execution and by the work that will be done in this new arrangement. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Braffey. Other speakers? Mr. Speaker, are you something? Senator Nichols, are you still speaking? Please. Senator Nichols.
Mr. President, let me begin by joining you and the other members in welcoming formally both Senator Dr. Braffett and Senator Dr. Haynes on their addition to this chamber. I'm sure that from the contributions we've heard so far today, we are going to be able to benefit from their expertise in their respective fields and lend a special quality to the debate. So I wanted to speak on these resolutions before the chamber precisely for the reason that I believe, sir, that there can be no clearer contrast to the manner in which this Barbados Labour Party administration approaches the development initiatives that we consider when we are in office and that of a past Democratic Labour Party administration. And whilst I believe that my colleague, Senator Haywood's contribution was an excellent one, and I really believe that when the annals of the records of this debate are written, his contribution today is required reading in terms of setting the perspective as to why context is everything. There are other issues that have bedeviled what he considered, and I too, the political football that has been in St. Joseph Hospital. And more importantly, the manner in which the University of the West Indies has been treated in our midst and in the recent past by the last Democratic Labour Party administration. And it's important to set the context because as the Democratic Labour Party under its new leadership sets now to whitewash the whole saga of the past and come out as if they are now coming from a New Jerusalem, we must not let them forget, and I agree with my colleague Senator Haywood in this regard. So I was in this chamber when the university administration introduced an amenities fee. Only amenities fee to help with things like sports and other co-curricular activities. And the moral problem that we faced from the then Senator Stewart and Senator Lowe as not a decision of the government of Barbados, but it was tacked on to a debate and a discussion, and Senator Paris would remember that. And lo and behold, you saw when the Democratic Labour Party took office, a particular aim was sought at the university, trained at the University of the West Indies, particularly the management of the Cayfield campus. It was a conscious and deliberate effort to go after the leadership of the University of the West Indies. And I asked myself over the years, why is that so? I have come to the view that the University of the West Indies leadership had something in common with that of the leadership of the Barbados Labour Party. A common goal to have one graduate in every household in this country. And that made university a political target. The Minister of Finance in the last Democratic Labour Party administration accused the university of supplying bogus accounts when the accumulated debt of the university was put before the government for the government to fulfill its responsibility to pay these debts. The University of the West Indies was accused of dumbing down the institution, lowering the matriculation requirements and allowing everybody to go to UWI. When at a time we understood the social demographic needs of the Barbadian people, and Senator Dr. Hines can tell you, it met a profile of the single working female parent, larger than any other specific demographic. But these were the people that were targeted as we dumbing down the university. But lastly, but not the least significant, was the removal of the subsidy to assist in the payment of tuition fees. We heard arguments that the country could not afford it. But the last 4 years of the Barbados Labour Party have shown that a government that prioritizes the development needs of its people can pay for what is essential. And we have shown that the notion that this country cannot afford education is a fallacy. What we can't afford, Mr. President, is ignorance. And that has been the steadfast policy of successive administrations. But all of a sudden we heard that we cannot afford to support the University of the West Indies. We heard that the government will have to increase all of these taxes to get students going back there. And, you know, it is really sad that this August chamber was assaulted by these notions, these false notions, from this very chamber, Mr. President, over the years, under the last administration, that this university was a millstone around the necks of the people of this country. Sir, I believe that the university has been a critical tool in the development of our Caribbean civilization. Sir, I've had the benefit of the insight, training, and expertise of some of the finest minds in the Caribbean, and persons who have been engaged in research that emerged at a time when we were, as newly independent countries, forging our way on the international scene. UWI has withstood a torrent of criticism and cynicism. But now, we have to acknowledge that the international ranking agencies rank the university as one of the top universities in the world. And therefore, this passage of the joint resolutions today brings two competing narratives to one happy conclusion, I hope. Sir, the other perspective we must look at is the treatment of the St. Joseph Hospital. The St. Joseph Hospital was a private hospital that was operating in Barbados. And Senator Haywood spoke to a certain extent in terms of the ultimatums given to former Barbados Labour Party administration at about 1986, which was an election year. We must put things in its proper context, in their proper context. The Democratic Labour Party came to office in 86 and bought the St. Joseph Hospital in 1988. They set up the St. Joseph Hospital Act, Cap 54B of the laws of Barbados, established a board and an administration to run the hospital, sir. And after many years of a miracle in waiting, and this is not the miracle by the sisters and the mothers of the Sorrows of Convent that ran the hospital, this was the miracle in waiting under the Democratic Labour Party administration between 86 and 94. The government had to make a choice, and sir, you were part of that administration, you and Madam Deputy President, that had to make a conscious decision as to whether the government of Barbados could continue to pump millions of dollars into the St. Joseph Hospital while neglecting and starving the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, the polyclinics, and the health system in Barbados of much needed resources. We could not find a justification for the extravagance that took place in the name of the St. Joseph Hospital. And sir, I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty and the facts, but we know that there was a public inquiry that went into these things. You would think that when the Democratic Labour Party came back to office in 2008, it would have purged itself of the earlier demons. But by 2011, sir, they were proposing a lease of the 21.5 acres at Ashton Hall. Buildings and all, for a partner to build an international health center. But you know what the lease payment was, Mr. President? 1,000 Barbados dollars per year for the first 3 years. That 21 acres of land. For the first 3 years. So that when we say today that there is a contextual difference in the approaches of the two political parties in terms of the development initiatives that drive this country, we cannot let this debate pass without making that contrast very clear. 3 years at $1,000 a year in Ashton Hall, St. Peter. Think about that. That was what this lease that we are rescinding today was hoping to achieve. The family jewels were on sale, sir. It passed this Senate and the other place. But, you know, we were considered junk at the time. Or we were at junk status, so we could not catch that deal. That is the only good thing about that saga, Mr. President. So that we contrast the vesting of this land in a special purpose vehicle to spur the development of the medical science capacity of the University of the West Indies. And let us reflect upon that, because we know, and Senator Haywood referred to it, and Madam Deputy President can tell you, the University of the West Indies expansion built the veritable middle class that is in St. James South. Large parts of it, people who have built on apartments and houses and stuff, and to be able to house and accommodate university students for the last 30 or 40 years. People have moved from those houses and gone on to other accommodations and so forth. And in his survey, Senator Haywood spoke about the potential to spur development in the heart of that community, stretching from Whitehall, Ashton Hall, and even as far as the Wim in St. Peter. We can imagine the re-emergence of commercial activity in much greater vigor in the Spikestown area, and the Mile and a Quarter area, and those areas. because we know what the value of a university town creates to a community. For those of us who have traveled abroad or who have studied abroad, we understand the importance of a university community within a local community. So that the development of the 21.5 acres by the University of the West Indies through this special purpose vehicle, which is the subject of one of the resolutions for our consideration today, to my mind is putting both the people of Barbados, the University of the West Indies, and the University of the West Indies in a good place. Because all that can come from that development, sir, is a positive thing. Sir, quite recently, the Secretary General of CARICOM, Dr. Carol Barnett, in delivering one of the lectures in the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Research, spoke on the sustained economic recovery post-pandemic model. And she listed 6 planks in her presentation. 2 stuck to my mind and are directly related to what we are trying to achieve within the context of these resolutions today. One is that the state plays a direct role and is a participant in the economic activity as a facilitator for building capacity. And 2, the state playing a role in creating a highly skilled labor force to drive productivity. We hear from the leader of government business today that the university has trained its gaze on the development of research in relation to diabetes. I hope that this facility would expand not only into diabetes, but the other NCDs, hypertension, stroke, heart attacks, and all the other ailments that particularly afflict our community. But I want to say, Mr. President, that another initiative of the University of the West Indies, which the research has emerged, shows that our predisposition to these diseases have been genetically driven due to our exposure to high levels of salt and sugar as the primary elements of our diet from times of slavery. And that is scientifically proven. And I want to say, Mr. President, that perhaps we should consider using the research capacity of the University of the West Indies and being able to formulate a model of funding by way of joining the reparations debate and using the development of this facility as a target for reparations within the context of how we approach those who benefited from 300 years of slavery in relation to building out the capacity of this institution, which will do research, which will do treatment, which will do engineering and all of the modern things in the medical techno fields that would inure to the development of our country. Sir, as I close my presentation on this resolution, I want to ask the leader of government business through you and this forum to ensure that we have the policy mix correctly. It is not a rose-colored approach just because I am thrice a graduate of the University of the West Indies, and that I firmly believe in what these resolutions are speaking to. But my concern is really what is the nature of the SPV and as it relates to the funding of it. Because the University of the West Indies, I understand the financial revolution spoken to by Senator Dr. Hines. But university has never really been able to wean itself off of government financing. And the development of this facility is going to be an expensive enterprise. And certainly the people of Barbados will not be forgiving if we commit ourselves into a economic endeavor which would require government to put substantial amounts of funding in it. We are trying to liberate the University of West Indies and wean it off of government financing so that this 21-acre development would be able to, they will be able to leverage it as an asset on their balance sheets, monetize it, and be able to finance its own development. But we must be very clear, because the West Indies, University of West Indies has not yet developed that culture to wean off of government financing. Second consideration, Mr. President, I believe is we must have a detailed assessment of the impact on the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. As to any, not only in relation to this development as a teaching hospital, because right now, or whatever facility, medical tourism, research, whatever it will be, we must be very clear as to what will be any impact or fallout, whether intended or unintended, in relation to the primary healthcare facility in Barbados, which we all spoke about today in another debate. Because we hear the articulation of the need to have clinical spaces for people who have completed the first part of their medical training, but at the same time we know that is the primary place where they go in Barbados. We also know that a lot of research is done through the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and a lot of work is done in the later part of the degree programs. So that I am not trying for one moment to say that the government has taken its eye off the ball, but I just want to ensure that we know what the full impact will be. And it is not only as a result of this resolution, Mr. President, because we see the development of medical universities coming to Barbados, and there may be prospects for more. But at the same time, we cannot have a situation where we are uncertain as to its impact on the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Final consideration, Mr. President, how do we measure success? Government must have a clear view as to where are the benchmarks in the early stages of this development and where we can reap benefits, multiply these benefits, and succeed in this endeavor. These resolutions, Mr. President, are formidable in the sense that they will place a greater prospect for the development both of the university and our economy and our people in Barbados at the forefront of what the government is doing. And a government has to facilitate the development and building of capacity. That, Mr. President, is the decisive difference between the government we serve and the one before. With those few words, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Nichols. Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I wish, as I attempt to close the debate on these two resolutions, to just take a few moments to respond to some of the things that were raised and some of the questions that were raised by the colleagues around the chamber so that we can close off the debate with some clarifications. First of all, this is not meant to be a teaching hospital. I know it was raised also by Senator Dr. Maynard as well as Senator Nichols. This is not intended, as I understand it, to be a teaching hospital. Neither is it intended to be a location for clinical rotations to be undertaken by students who have graduated with medical degrees. My understanding from the University of the West Indies is that the relationship which already exists with the Queen Elizabeth Hospital will continue as it is currently set up. I heard earlier a comment being made erroneously so that perhaps this may be the opportunity to correct, but I believe that just last night, the board of directors of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital met, and that board is constituted by a principal of the University of the West Indies as a standing member. Professor Clive Landis has been appointed, as I understand it, under the existing legislation, even though the legislation is amending to expand the number of persons there, was the person who is now in his right as the principal of the University of the West Indies at Cave Hill, replacing the now retired principal of UWI, the Most Honorable Eugene Baratow. Now, we also have a question being raised around exporting of persons and role being played by different entities within the University of the West Indies. Just to suffice, under the financial revolution that is being referenced in the 2017 to 2022 strategic plan, and then the 2022 to 2025 strategic plan of the University of the West Indies, there are medical anchors being referred to on each of the campuses, and I did make reference to the fact that in that revolution, that each campus, I did make mention earlier of Trinidad and Tobago, among that medical core, among the innovations expected for that medical corridor is an offshore medical university in Trinidad and Tobago. It is not contemplated for here in Barbados, and in response to the question of training persons for export, the University of the West Indies Mona campus is now earmarked in their own medical intervention to be training nurses for export to the region and to beyond. And this particular SPV is the installation that is going to take place here in Barbados, particularly focused on research and development, innovation, entrepreneurship, and commercialization, and anchoring, of course, the work which has already been underway with regard to diabetes treatment. Now, this is specifically already being done under what we call the Diabetes Reversal Project, and it is being funded, interestingly, by a partner in the international transport and international tourism sector, Richard Branson. This is a partnership with the university, and so the university is very much looking at monetization and partnerships and philanthropy. Finally, Mr. President, I would want to make the point that I had the privilege before I left the University of the West Indies as a member of the executive management team based out of our headquarters at the time in Jamaica to have led the process along with Dr. Knut Brown at the time out of the Mona campus to restart the university at the onset of the pandemic. We co-chaired that process, and the investment of the University of the West Indies in technology was significant to allow for university students all across the Caribbean to be able to return to the classroom using the technology. In fact, Mr. President, just a few weeks ago, I was able to join the Prime Minister and the Minister of Education, Science and Technology at the opening of the City campus of the University of the West Indies in Bridgetown, Barbados, which focuses on the software engineering program, which is a partnership in technology and software engineering between Barbados and China, the SITS Institute in China, where students spend their first part of their degree here in Barbados and then are immersed in the equivalent of Silicon Valley in China, the Suzhou region. We have a campus in Suzhou, which facilitates the second part of that program. So I think perhaps the university needs to do a better job of telling its own story, because the university is definitively very much a global university. It is anchored in technology, it is internationally partnering, and it is producing the skills of the future, including in new anchor programs like the program in software technology. And then the final component that I want to make reference to in terms of students monetizing their outputs. There is a program that is being run and has been run for many, many years by Dr. Ayana Young Marshall. I believe it is the SEED program, Student Entrepreneurship and Empowerment Development Program, which does seek to create opportunities for University of the West Indies students to engage in commercial and enterprise type activity. And then finally, I also had the privilege of being able to lead a World Bank project under the University of the West Indies, and funded by the governments of Canada, executed by the World Bank and run by the University of the West Indies, a program that ran for 3 years across the entire Caribbean called Pitch It Caribbean, where people, students of the university, researchers, innovators, private sector people were encouraged to come to the University of the West Indies with new commercially ready ideas, pitch, and then benefit from seed investment as part of your venture capital. So UWI TV, for example, and all of the platforms that are already there, perhaps may need to partner even more so with our local communities so that the message of what is being done in the university already is being made known. And it is for all these reasons, Mr. President, that those persons who sit in the councils of the University of the West Indies on its campuses and at the regional headquarters level are very much those people in whom we have the confidence, Mr. President, as a government, that they can and will take this initiative forward. I take the points that we do need to have performance metrics so that it does not become another unexecuted project, and that we do make sure that the government and the people of Barbados, in a partnership with the University of the West Indies, are able to bring this to full fruition. And on that basis, Mr. President, I beg to move that the first resolution do not pass, and I'll pause to perhaps read it through, clerk, and then I'll come to the second resolution.
Yes. Honourable Senators, the question is that order number 4, the resolution to rescind the lease of the land to American World Clinics Barbados Limited, do now pass. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Honourable Senators against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. Resolution is now passed.
Mr. President, I beg to move that order 3, to move the passing of a resolution.
But it's second, clerk.
Order number 3, sir, in the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve, in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Chapter 225, the vesting in a commercial special service vehicle in which the government of Barbados will hold 25% of the shares, and the University of the West Indies at Cave will hold the remaining 75% of the parcel of land, the property of the state, formerly known as the St. Joseph Hospital, situated at Ashton Hall in the parish of St. Peter in this island, for the purpose of a joint venture between the government and the University of the West Indies.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do no pass.
The question is that this resolution do not pass. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. This resolution is therefore no pass.
Mr. President, this brings us all to the end of government business for the day. I do want to thank all of the colleagues for their full participation in both resolutions that were brought to the House today, and I in particular want to welcome once more, and having completed their very first sitting in the Senate chamber, our very new senators, Dr. Christina Hines and Dr. Chelston Brathwaite. Thank you all very much. We adjourn sine die.
Before we take the question of adjournment, we want to revert to questions from senators.
Thank you.
Senator Dr. Hines.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question in 2 parts to ask the Leader of the Senate. The question is it the intention of the government of Barbados to introduce into Parliament new child protection legislation? If so, what is the time frame for such introduction? That's part A. B, will this new child protection legislation repeal and replace the Juvenile Offenders Act, Cap 138, and the Reformatory and Industrial Schools Act, Cap 169? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Hines.
Thank you very much, Senator Hines. I will take these questions to the requisite ministry and their lead minister, and we will revert to you in due course with the appropriate answers.
We can now revert to the adjournment. The question is that the Honourable Senate, you have adjourned, sign it aye. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Honourable Senators against, please say no. The things the ayes have it. This setting, the Senate therefore stands adjourned, sign it aye.